Before we kick off, I want to tell you about a few things that are happening. Some of them you'll already know, but there seems to be a lot going on at the moment. I'm starting to do what I'm calling, I'll think of a better name for it, but morning reflections, where 2 or 3 times a week, while I'm having my morning coffee, for all of my patrons at any level, I do a little, 10, 15-minute reflection. And I'm really enjoying them because it kind of makes me feel more connected with those of you who are supporting me. And what I do every morning, it's my little ritual, is I make a coffee and I will think about stuff. Sometimes it's about the work. Sometimes it might be about the news, about what's going on in the world. And so these little morning reflections are a way for me to invite you into that experience with me just for like 10, 15 minutes, and then I'll go off and do my thing and you go off and do your thing. Also, we've just kicked off the first cartels. Cartel is a small group of about 5 people with a +1. +1 is currently me. And what we're going to do in the cartels is we're actually going to create Church of the Contradiction liturgies. So these are groups that are going to create events. Now, we're going to create them in a fictional way. We're just going to create them and critique them, but hopefully some of those will actually end up being done somewhere in the world, perhaps online as well. So the cartels are happening. That's at the top level of the patrons, the Inferno level. And that's just a way of thanking those of you who are at that level. But it's also a place for church leaders and whatnot who can get their churches to pay. And then, you can kind of be part of that with me. Then we have Wake, which is in end of April. And I've got Philosophy Portal and Everyday Analysis who are involved as well. So I think we're going to have the most number of contributors we've ever had. That's happening in Belfast. It's a festival of ideas. And then we've got Spark, which I've just launched. Spark will be happening in October. It is my very luxury event. I started it off in a hotel that was nice, and then the hotel just got nicer and nicer. It got bought over by a luxury company, and then they added this outdoor spa, and it's become incredible. But because I was in there early, I've been able to, just by the skin of my teeth, be able to stay working with them. So that's going to be happening until eventually they maybe kick me out. But I would recommend Spark if you're looking for a holiday that combines a kind of a holiday experience, but exploring really your unconscious, your symptoms, your repetitions, your inhibitions. And it's really a chance for you to encounter yourself, which can be a very scary thing. Anyway, those are a few things I wanted to tell you about. Also, as always, if you're watching live, please comment in the live chat. You can say whatever you want. You can slag me off. It's free for all. But if you have a question, just put a Q and then write your question, and I'll look for Qs. And at the end of this, we'll do that. Oh, and then the final thing, after this talk, which I'm going to try and keep reasonably short for this reason, after this talk, Kate Burgess is doing a 101 discussion group on Zoom. And that's going to happen at 11:30 a.m. PST. So basically an hour and a half from now, 7:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. So an hour and a half from now, or an hour and 25 minutes from now, that will be happening. There is a Zoom room. If you don't know the Zoom room link, if Kate is listening, she can put it in, but I don't know if you can put links in the top chat. So you can find it on the last email I sent. You can find it on my Instagram Reels. And yes, anyway, I'll leave you to find it. Or if you're on the WhatsApp group, the Patreon WhatsApp group, ask there and we can link you to it. So that's for anybody who is particularly new to my work and would just like a space to ask really basic questions. And basically no question is too basic. Kate has been working with me for many years. She actually did Atheism for Lent a number of years ago, and it really changed something in her. It was an important shift in her life. It was just came at the right time. And then she got involved with my work. So she's the perfect person to help others who are kind of being introduced to this work. Okay, so there you go. I'm sure I've forgotten lots of things, but those are the main ones. So hello and welcome to another Paro seminar. As always, I give these once a month on YouTube, and they're really the place for me to explore the theory and the technology of Paro theology, which is a radical theology. And in the last 6 months, I've been giving a series of talks that all interweave and interlink. I mean, hopefully the talks I've been giving over the last 5 or 6 years of doing these monthly talks all interweave and interrelate. But, you know, I do try to find themes. So what I've done recently is I've explored knowledge, I've explored belief, I've looked at ritual, and I've looked at faith. And there's been a few other concepts around those, but those are like the 4 main ones that I've been exploring over the last little while. I'm going to revisit those for a few minutes, and then I'm going to not so much build. I am building on them, but I'm also taking a different look. There's something about these ideas that are difficult at first, and you kind of have to approach them from loads of different angles. And those of you who have been following this work for a while, you'll probably know that for a while nothing makes sense, and then it's like one of those 3D pictures. You kind of look at it and you don't see anything, and then suddenly the image becomes clear. So if you're new to this work and these seminars kind of seem strange at first, that's kind of, there's no way around it. There's no real easy way in. You have to kind of jump in, because we're looking at all of these different concepts that get their meaning in relation to their constellation, in their relationship with other concepts. So it's very difficult to look at things in a linear way. It's more like a neural link, like lots of different pathways, and you start to get a sense of these different concepts and how they interconnect. Okay, so what I was looking at is the idea of knowledge as knowledge, which basically means, I mean, it used to be justified true belief is one definition that I think originates with Plato. But if we think of knowledge as something we cannot deny, something that is absolutely indubitable, then what I've been arguing is that there is a fundamental knowledge to being human, and it's the knowledge that there is something we do not know. There is a knowledge of a limit. And I've looked at that in a whole variety of different ways, philosophically and psychoanalytically. But if we just take this, you know, for this brief overview, go like, knowledge is knowledge of a fundamental lack. And that manifests in 2 ways. It manifests in our speech, where we can never fully say what we want to say. There's always something missing. Language is always evolving and changing. And there's a great parable, actually. I think it's a Chinese parable. Let me try and remember this. Where a man has 5 stallions, and one night there's a storm. The fence that keeps them in collapses, and they gallop off. And his neighbors come round and they say to him, "Oh, you know, this is so unfortunate." And the old farmer just says, maybe. And then a week later, the 5 stallions come back, and they have 5 more wild horses behind them. And the neighbors gather around and say, "Oh my goodness, how lucky you are." And the farmer goes, maybe. And then one of his sons, his oldest son, was riding one of the wild horses to break them in, falls off and breaks his leg. And the neighbors gather around and say, "Oh, how unfortunate." And the farmer goes, maybe. And then about a week later, while his son is still in bed with a broken leg, some people from the government come round to enroll people into and recruit people into the army for a war, but they can't take him because he's got a broken leg. And the neighbors all gather around and they say, "Oh, how lucky you are." And the farmer says, maybe. And it's a great little parable about how there's this openness. You can never totalize or close off. Something that looks lucky can become unlucky, and then what's unlucky can become lucky. And there's no end to that as long as you're alive, right? And that language is a little bit like that. There's a sense of an openness to it that can never fully land. And also in our desire, in our bodily enjoyment, there's a certain sense in which there's always something that we desire, something that is missing, right? So those are two ways that this lack manifests itself. Then I spoke about belief as the type of blanket we put over this lack to try to avoid a confrontation with it. And so we talked about that a fair amount in the past, but there's belief is in a sense a denial in some way of this lack. And there's lots of different ways we do that. In psychoanalysis, they're called repression, disavowal, and foreclosure. These are different ways to avoid acknowledging this lack that is subjectively registered. We may not believe it consciously, but it's registered in our language and it's registered in our bodily enjoyments. And then I argued that confessional rituals are designed to support belief, to help us avoid directly either consciously acknowledging lack or experiencing the anxiety that comes from acknowledging it. So in one, you've got apologetics, where apologetics is designed to try to cover over this lack consciously, but also you can have certain forms of belief, like more progressive, where you can doubt as much as you want and experience radical unknowing, radical negativity. But all the sermons and the songs and the sacraments seem to act as if there is no lack. And so the example I've used before is something like the tooth fairy. Like an adult doesn't believe in the tooth fairy, but they get the enjoyment of the belief as long as the child believes. So in a similar way, you can have lots of doubts, but you won't experience the existential horror of those doubts as long as the church believes on your behalf, as long as the liturgy believes. And this is very different from what we see in Christianity, where the whole crucifixion experience is an existential experience of lack. Right? So I argued then that a radical liturgy, the liturgy of parotheology, is designed to penetrate belief, to help you encounter directly the lack, to tarry with that lack. And that's why I call this the communion of non-believers. Right? It's a social bond forged around a shared recognition of negation. And I talked about the gift of faith as living into that negation, being able to find life within that death, light within the darkness, to be able to endure and enjoy that lack, which is the truth. The truth. Okay, so that's what we've looked at so far. That will help you understand what we're doing with Church of the Contradiction. What I want to talk about now is, I want to talk about this in relation to, first of all, the symptom. I want to define what a symptom is. I'm going to use a reference to the Titanic and to the Mona Lisa. And then I want to connect it to the Apostle Paul's definition of the person of faith, the Christian, as the trash of the world. And the word trash, it's actually sharper than that. What he uses in Greek is more like shit, right? So it's the refuge, it's the garbage, trash, but it's even stronger than those words. Paul is literally saying the Christian is the shit of the world, right? So I want to look at what that might mean and how it relates to the communion of non-believers. Okay, so what is a symptom psychoanalytically? A symptom, from a deep psychoanalytic perspective, well, first of all, it's something you do that or don't do, because it can be an inhibition, something you can't do, or a compulsion, a repetition, something, you compulsively check to see if the door's locked or if the windows are closed, or you repeat some sort of action again and again, like washing your hands. Right, you're always compulsively washing your hands until they're raw, until they're bleeding. right? A friend of mine, Rebecca, who commented this on my Instagram publicly, so I don't think it's a secret. If it is, she shouldn't have put it publicly on my Instagram. But she says when she's stressed, she pulls her eyelashes, right? And this is kind of, she says, it's like a compulsion. She can't help it. And so she says it's very hard for her to grow eyelashes because she's always poking them. Or there's people who will pick the corners of their nails or bite their nails, say, or there's compulsive hand washing. Something that you can't seem to consciously do anything about. You can't get advice that tells you don't do that. The advice just doesn't work. It's something that you find yourself unable to resist doing. And it causes a certain suffering. And, and so I want to look at three aspects of this, three aspects of the symptom. The first aspect is it is empirical, right? It's something you do, right? It's some sort of activity. It can be a sexual thing. It can be a personality explosion of emotions, unregulated emotions, or it can be biting your nails, pulling your eyelashes, picking your skin off your fingers, whatever it is. And so it's something that exists. The second thing about the symptom, and this is where most therapies stop, right, is a symptom can be interpreted, right? So at first, it doesn't seem like it. Like a symptom is just almost like a thing. It's an artifact, a monument that just sits there. But when we start to interrogate it, we can start to see that it has a meaning. So for example, washing hands obsessively could mean something like a person feels guilty. They feel dirty in some sort of way, and so they're washing their hands because unconsciously they are trying to feel less guilt, less dirt. Right? So it is something that has a meaning, and you start to interrogate it, find out what it's saying, and it connects with something in your childhood. So you may not remember this, but perhaps you touched yourself and your mother was saying, don't touch yourself like that, right? Go wash your hands. That's dirty. That's filthy, right? And, and this really sinks in and you have this sense of guilt. And then without knowing it, this becomes this kind of, maybe later in life, a repetitive, compulsive behavior. So symptoms, they exist. They can be interpreted. But the most interesting thing about the symptom is that there is a kernel of the symptom that resists interpretation, that cannot be interpreted, a dark navel of the symptom that, in a way, it covers over a question, a fundamental mystery. And what that mystery is what Freud called the das Ding of the other, the thing of the other, which we've talked about in previous seminars, but it's the idea that the mystery of the other's desire, what do they mean? What do they want from me? How am I desirous or not desirous to the other? The question of where do we fit in the other's desire? What do they want? Now, with this example of the hand washing, this person, this young child, is confronted with this disappointment and this anger, and they don't really fully understand what they've done or why it's wrong. And so there's a fundamental mystery at the very heart of the symptom. And this fundamental mystery, this fundamental lack of an answer, is what's called the real. And so a symptom hits the real like a little hammer, sounding hammer hits a bell. The core of the symptom, what makes it pleasurable, is that there's a dimension to it that we do not know. And this causes jouissance, right? So desire is a type of kind of not having. You desire what you do not have. Jouissance is when you hit the not having directly, when you get the real, get the truth of lack itself. Now, to kind of make that understandable, I want to use two examples. The Mona Lisa, which I've used before. So the Mona Lisa has the three elements. It is a painting, so it exists as a painting. It can be interpreted in multiple ways. People do x-rays of it. People talk about who this woman is, where it was set. They talk about the history of it, etc., etc. So there's lots of things you can do to interpret the painting. But that at the core of the painting, and what makes it the most famous painting in the world, is the enigmatic smile. This smile, which kind of like hides something. Is it a smile? What's she smiling about? What's going on? It's enigmatic, it's mysterious. And so the Mona Lisa at its core is about the enigmatic smile. Just like the Cheshire Cat in, forget what it's called, Alice in Wonderland, which kind of disappears until there's only the smile. Interestingly, the Mona Lisa, and it's kind of crazy, how can nothing exist except for the smile? The smile is a type of lack, but it's a type of lack that communicates something. And the other example to use is the Titanic. And Zizek uses this in his most famous book, the Sublime Object of Ideology. I like the Titanic example because I live in Belfast where Titanic was built, and I can actually see where the Titanic was built. It's right outside where I live. And there's a Titanic museum right there. And you can think about the Titanic with these three elements. So a ship sinks. That's a happening. It's an event. But ships sink, planes crash, all of these disasters happen. The Titanic wasn't just a ship sinking. It's become something mythical, something that, we literally have museums around the world on it. This is one of the biggest tourist attractions in the whole of the UK, is this Titanic museum. It's got movies have been made of it, books have been written about it. So you go like, why? It's just a ship sinking. It's a tragedy, but why does it remain so interesting? And you can say it remains interesting because it has so much symbolic freight, right? So the Titanic has a lot of symbolic meaning, and like a dream, like when Freud said you overinterpret a dream, you don't just get one interpretation, but you can actually find multiple interpretations, and they don't all fit together. You can say the Titanic is a symbol of human achievement. This vessel that was connecting continents and connecting people. You can say it maybe as a symbol of human hubris. Famously, I don't think anybody did say this, but even God himself couldn't sink her. It also signals potentially a lack of class antagonism, so what's called corporatism, which is kind of always connected with fascism, actually. So where the different classes exist in a non-antagonistic way. So you got the upper class, you got the middle class, you've got the lower class, all on this ship, all enjoying the human ingenuity that created this, all enjoying the kind of the human spirit. And of course, then hitting the iceberg, which is kind of like bringing all of this to naught, which can be seen as kind of the coming of various class conflicts and the coming of the war, et cetera, et cetera. So you look at the Titanic, and it has so much symbolic meaning. If you think about this in terms of world conflicts as well, there are lots of world conflicts. Why do some world conflicts become more important than others? And it's because they have a certain symbolic resonance. So interestingly, during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, Israel-Palestine was huge. And it was used to tell whether you were a Catholic or a Protestant, right? So Catholics technically supported Palestine and Protestants technically supported Israel. And people didn't know anything that was going on in the Middle East, but they would still ask you, not are you a Catholic or a Protestant, or are you a unionist or a nationalist? They'd ask, do you support Israel or Palestine? And you had an answer, even if you didn't know anything about the conflict, because it had a symbolic resonance with the Troubles. There was something in that reflected what was going on here. So, again, when you ask yourself, why do certain conflicts take on significance over others? What's the symbolic freight that's within them? But then the Titanic has this third element, and the third element is the wreckage of the Titanic, which is endlessly fascinating. And we know that, I think it was 2 years ago now or more, the Titan submergible was crushed when people who were going down to look at the ruins. And Shizek uses this to talk about the real dimension as well, where we're just fascinated not by the meaning and not by the image of the ship, but by the murky, dark, impenetrable wreckage of the Titanic. And that's jouissance. And actually, in the Titanic Museum, if any of you have ever done it, all those elements are there. You go in, and there's lots of stuff about just the ship, about the history and the context, and so you've got the ship itself, the image, and then you have the symbolic meanings as you go around the museum. There's all the symbolism, but at the very end of the museum trip tour, you go into this room with a glass floor. And on the glass floor, you look down, and it's like you're in the ocean, and you can see the wreckage of the Titanic in this inky black water. Just this kind of dark, mysterious, crumbling wreckage. That's a good analogy for the symptom. And this is why a symptom can never be interpreted away fully. Because that was always a problem in therapy, is why does interpretation not rid you of the symptom? Because jouissance, there's a bit of the symptom that hits the real. Right? This is why I'm not a relativist, by the way, because I think we hit the real, we hit the truth, and the symptom is the evidence of it. Our symptoms are where we hit the truth, and the affect of hitting the truth is jouissance and anxiety. They're interconnected. So that's kind of an idea of the symptom. Now, this connects with what I've been talking about previously, because in the symptom, that's where we hit on a fundamental nothing, an excremental remainder that has no meaning, that has no value, that is outside of the symbolic register entirely. And this brings me to the Apostle Paul's thing of we are the shit of the world, right? The trash of the world, the excrement of the world. Because if you think about trash or excrement, it is, once all the useful stuff is taken out of it, that's what's left. This pure something that is nothing, that has no value. And there's some way that Paul is perceiving that we must identify with this element, with this real, with this excremental, complete nothing. And in doing so, there's something salvatory in that identification. And so bringing this to Christianity and to Church of the Contradiction, the idea is to create a liturgy in which, through the songs, the sermons, and the sacraments, we are brought to see this fundamental real, this fundamental uninterpretable mystery, this pure negation that is without meaning, and yet which persists, which insists. And in encountering it in the liturgy, we interject it into ourselves, and we're able to directly enjoy it, enjoying what we do not have, being able to position ourselves in relation to this fundamental mystery. And in Christianity, it's called many things. In Judaism, there's a tetragrammaton, which is at the core, at the very heart of God, is this unsayable, unnameable 4 letters. There is, in the crucifixion, this idea of Christ experiencing the fundamental unknowing at an existential level, forsakenness, alienation. We have the notion of the cloud of unknowing, a mystical notion, and the dark night of the soul. All of these are ways of naming this encounter with the absolute negation that is always resonant in everything and in us. And when we hit that, we experience jouissance. So Church of the Contradiction is, I say, through the liturgy, which represents that, which kind of in various ways, through the music and say the spoken word, you start to encounter that fundamental mystery, not intellectually, but you open yourself up to that mystery as it resonates and reverberates within you. You develop a semi-permeable membrane with that lack, with that negation. You find yourself able to tolerate it, to find a way to not unmediate it, not see the face of God, because you won't live, but in a mediated way to touch on that negation in a way, as I say, that changes your very way of being in the world. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like then you will no longer be caught up in the frenetic pursuit of something that will satisfy you and make you whole, because you will directly enjoy the non-wholeness, the holiness of the world. You'll directly enjoy a type of lack rather than attempting always to overcome that lack. Okay, I think that's the main stuff I want to cover. I just want to see in my notes if there's anything else. I think this is a fundamentally countercultural way of being in the world. It's fundamentally transgressive in many ways. It's a way of, transgressive is maybe not the right word actually, because it's a way of like being in the world but not of it. Where in embracing this dark night of the soul, in entering this cloud of unknowing, in touching this pure negativity, it creates a different form of consumer, a way in which we consume products, but also a different type of politics. And yes, I should end with this because the subtitle of this talk was, I think, something like towards a non-identity politics. And the reason why I called it that is Lacan's critique of what's called object relations psychotherapy was that in object relations there are objects that we relate to, internal objects of our mother and our father and our siblings. We have these relations, these object relations, right? Not objects like the computer, but objects like, say, an internalized image of my mother. And in object relations, these are fundamental. Lacan basically said, no, he's an object A relations theorist, which means object A is the non-object. It's the lack of an object. He says what's fundamental to the psyche, to the subject, is not an object, but the lack of an object, a fundamental mystery that we orbit around and that we occasionally hit on. And in the same way, my critique of both identitarianism on the right and identity politics on the left is that fundamentally what unifies us is not an identity, but rather a lack of identity. That all of us as subjects of desire and subjects of language are subjects who revolve around a lack. And in fact, gender is the name for that, right? Gender is how we respond, how we position ourselves in relation to this lack. But that's a talk for another day. But by calling this a non-identity politics is saying, how do we create not a community with shared identities, but how do we create not the commons, which is like a park where you encounter people who are different? That's wonderful, but both of these are wonderful. But well, how do we create a communion where we are gathered together around a shared lack, which is reflected in God itself, right? As a divided, Trinitarian, alienated reality, which is a way of saying alienation is within everything. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense. I'm going to have a little look, see if anyone's got any questions. There's a bit of conflict in terms of the philosophy portal. Some of you do at 7:30 and can't do the 101. No, I don't think so. I think there's just various comments about the next group that's happening. Oh, here's a question. Chris says, isn't the failure of identity politics just another example of the fact that our descriptions are not the thing they describe? They always fall short. Language fails us. Yeah, absolutely. And there's two ways of thinking about that, which comes back, Chris, to things we've discussed and will continue to discuss until the end, is in the mystical tradition, we cannot describe a reality that is too much for words. And then in radical theology, we cannot describe something because it is a fundamental lack. And both of those I quite like as positions. So I always end up saying I like the mystics and I like the radicals, because both are saying that there's something that cannot be spoken, cannot be said, which means there is a fundamental mystery. But what's interesting to me, what I'm trying to do in something like this talk is go, that's not just a religious idea, right? Religions have been saying that for ages. There is an unspeakable dimension, and that we relate to this negativity, and we have to make space for this ultimate mystery. And if someone's not confessionally religiously oriented, they might just go, oh, it's all rubbish, right? It doesn't make any sense. So what I love to do is use psychoanalysis, because they're saying exactly the same thing. They're saying the symptom is where we encounter the real of something that cannot be spoken, cannot be interpreted. And just like in religious experience, when you encounter the mystery and you have an excess, a plenitude of experience, right? What's called religious experience. In psychoanalysis, that's called jouissance, where you hit on the real and you have an experience not of desire, which is always a bit disappointing. You have an experience of jouissance, which is overwhelming and often painful, but it's overwhelming. So I'm always kind of, in a way, in some way secularizing these ideas, or showing that this religious notion is not something otherworldly, that something about Church of the Contradiction does not require any certain supernatural or metaphysical beliefs, but it does say that there is a way we can touch the real. There's a way in which we can transform our mode of being in the world that is emancipatory, that has real consequences politically and culturally, and that we need liturgy in order to do that. I was actually just on a podcast where I was asked to defend, why do I talk about God? And I was like, not only did I defend God, I defended the church, which is probably even harder to do. Not the church, but a church. The idea of a space in which music, say song, sermon, and sacrament all help us touch the real. Anyway, let's see. Parsons says, question, isn't this where all of the sciences modernity feels? They're trying to get at this objectively. Lacan shows us this is a non-object objectively. After Kant, objective substance is subject. Absolutely. You said it really beautifully there. I know you have to say things in like 180 characters or less, so you did it. Congratulations. Let me just break that down. That, a critique of science, a critique of modernity in some respects is that there is something and there's nothing. That's it. There either something exists or it doesn't. The idea that there's a nothing that is something is you do see it in like things like Gödel's incompleteness theorem. You do see it in quantum mechanics. So science does get there, but scientism, like scientism and some of modernity's Enlightenment thinkers, there was a sense in which the idea of a nothing that is something, and that we orient ourselves to, that we touch, just made no sense. And that's this critique of this, that it makes sense to talk about a type of non-object, and I like to call that God. Isn't Christ in me now that I am hysterical? God is divided. Absolutely, Parsons. That's it. The whole point of the Church of the Contradiction, and I did talks on this last year, is Lacan, as Parsons knows, mentions four what he calls social discourses. There's a couple more, but there's four that are connected. And the last one he mentions is the hysterics discourse. And what that is this is what Church of the Contradiction is. An hysteric is someone who is divided, who experiences division. Do I love this person? Do I not love them? Should I stay in this job? Should I not? Right? The hysteric feels themselves divided. And in the hysterics discourse, you are confronted by an hysterical being, and that causes you to experience anxiety, breaks you open. So maybe you come to Church of the Contradiction with concrete belief in how the world works, but the liturgy embraces unknowing, doubt, complexity, alienation. And through that, you begin to crack in terms of your certainties and your dogmatisms, and you begin to think. And that creates knowledge. So yes, the hysterics discourse, and Christ for me is the hysteric. Christ for me is the image of the hysterical God, which was the working title of my next book. But I'm actually going to call it My Favorite Emptiness, which is a line from a Pádraig Ó Tuama poem. And I saw Pádraig today, and I was like really nervous about asking him if I could use this title for the book. So one of you, I forget who it was, we were in a meeting, and I said, they were like, oh, I'm going to see Pádraig. And I said, well, you might want to mention to him that I'm thinking of stealing the line. Anyway, I met with him today, and he says, of course you can have the line. So I think my new book is going to be called My Favorite Emptiness. Bill, you say, following on with Chris's question, is it the lack, insufficiency in language? Is the lack or insufficiency that we encounter in language not in what we are using language to describe, identify? Hold on, following on from Chris, is it the lack, insufficiency in language? Is it, there's a typo somewhere, so I'm just trying to work it out. Not in what we are using language to describe. Oh, the insufficiency is in language, not in what language is trying to describe. Or could it be both? Yeah, these are basically, if I hear you right, Bill, there's a sense in which I cannot say everything about this computer. There'll always be stuff that I can't say. There's like Kant calls it the intuition and the concept. So the intuition is I experience the laptop, but I'll never be able to kind of fill that completely. There's always more to say about it. So there's an insufficiency there. And then is there a question of there's an insufficiency in the laptop as well? That it's not just that I can't adequately describe reality. There is something in reality that is non-totalizable, that reality itself is incomplete. Right? Those are the positions. And I want to say that there is a dimension to reality that cannot be spoken, that is incomplete, a quantum dimension. But, I'd have to argue why, but I haven't. There's lots of seminars I've tried to make that argument. But yeah, the mystics almost say we cannot speak of God because God's beyond speaking. But I'm kind of saying, what if there's something about the absolute, about absolute reality itself that is unspeakable? It's radically open. Not a million miles away from process theology. I've debated two process theologians recently, or had conversations with two process theologians recently. Not convinced by it, but those podcasts will be coming out soon. And then Ruben, is there still room to also train presence or haviness as opposed to lack? There is still value in the law of attraction, right? We can practice and learn to radiate higher inner frequencies. Okay, I'll take the first bit especially. Is there still room to train presence or haviness as opposed to lack? Yeah, that's the discussion, and we'll have more of those discussions. As I've kind of said before, my PhD was ultimately, I suppose, trying to argue that the notion of having, of kind of experiencing something beyond our understanding, and a type of relationship to something fundamentally missing, are both preferable to what used to be called the metaphysics of presence. So in my PhD, one was called deconstruction, Derrida's deconstruction, which is an openness to something that you can never grasp. And then there was a guy, Jean-Luc Marion, he called it denomination, which was trying to name what you have grasped but are unable to express. So denomination and deconstruction. And I was trying to kind of argue, well, both of those are preferable to the idea that you can name something, that you can have it. But as I've gone further, I am more drawn to this idea of lack. But yes, anyway, we can keep talking about that. As I say, I'll keep talking with Chris about that until we're both in the ground. A few more questions are coming up, actually. So Anna says, have you come across McGilchrist's concept of left-right hemisphere brains? Yes, useful to explain knowing versus connection beyond comprehension. Yes, I know McGilchrist's work a little bit. Haven't delved that deeply into it. My dear friend and podcast partner, Elliot, really likes him. Yeah, I'll have to jump a little bit deeper in maybe. What's Gordon say? Look, mate, quit the fancy talk. Everything and everything is in fact God. No, but I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying that everything is nothing. In fact, and I was going to mention this. Suppose, I don't know if it was the last kind of public thing that David Lynch did, but David Lynch, there's something floating around the internet at the moment, and it's a beautiful reflection on nothingness. And he talks about how John Lennon, when he was with this yogi kept talking about Marishna, was his name maybe, but kept talking about nothingness, about the nothing, about the pure field of nothingness. And John Lennon said, are you telling me that nothing is going to change the world? And the yogi really liked this. And anyway, John Lennon went away and he wrote a song called Across the Universe. And one of the refrains in that song is, nothing's going to change the world. And he says it in such an uplifting way. And when you first hear the song, you kind of wonder, why is he saying that in such an uplifting way? Because it sounds so depressing. Nothing's going to change the world, right? But when you know the context and you go, oh, he's not saying nothing's going to change the world. He's saying nothing, an encounter with nothing, a hitting on nothingness, that will change the world. Andrew saying, have you seen the books coming out, God is Undead? I'm very excited about that book, yes. Adrian Johnson, and who is the second author? I've heard Adrian Johnson talking about it. He's a thinker that I respect a lot, and so I'm very interested in reading that book. Okay. Well, I will leave it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating, being part of this. Next week, we have Coffee and Concepts for people on Patreon. We then have got our book study the weeks after that. And if you're interested, there's a 101 in 40 minutes. Go join Kate there to continue the discussion. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.